Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft, and the world in between. And welcome to the 50th edition of this podcast. So small little birthday party, so 50 editions are out. Let's go and see to make 50 or even more in the future. Now, what brought this week? Quite some news from the Microsoft area and also some highlights from the SAP area. Let's start with the SAP side of the house. So what we have here is a little blog post that I like to highlight by DJ Adams around setting up the Business Technology Platform CLI. So maybe you have not even heard that there is now a CLI in order to interact with the Business Technology Platform. And this little SAP Tech Byte now guides you through how to install the CLI, where to get additional information, and how to have some basic first setup in order to interact with the Business Technology Platform on the level of a CLI. So quite helpful, quite useful, I would guess. Then from the area of, let's say, Kyma, kind of a follow-up of last week's blog post that I presented of Piotr Tesny, who last week highlighted the OpenIDC connection and bringing in Kyma as a glue code in order to bring things together. This week, the blog post is about Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, as an OpenID Connect and OAuth provider, how to set things up on the Azure AD side, how to bring things together with the SAP Technology Platform, and how to make use of Azure Functions in order to glue things together. So moving from last week, I think it was Keycloak as OpenID Connect provider, now moving to Azure AD. Again, a very extensive blog post giving you an overview about the basic architecture and then guiding you through what you have to do in order to set up things. With that, I'm already at the end of the SAP side. Let's switch to the Microsoft side. First one, general announcement. You might have seen it. It's now official. Windows 11 will be launched on October the 5th. So the new version of Windows with the especially updated UI with a lot of new functionality, integrated Teams client, and so on, will become available at that date. As you also might know, not all devices that run Windows 10 are supported. So take a closer look. There have been some updates with respect to the requirements that your machine has to fulfill. But unfortunately, all my machines do not fulfill it. So maybe time for a new device. With that, let's switch to the serverless area. And there is one really super interesting blog post around the usage of Azure Functions and Azure Durable Functions for an automatic grading engine. So the scenario is quite interesting. It's students have to do some tests and like setting up a VNet on Azure. And they have to provide the result or the ARM template or whatever in a specific format, upload that somewhere. And then there are two functionalities that are executed in a serverless manner, namely the schedule grader. So executing the grading of the results, and then a class grade reporter generator, that's how it's called, in order to create the grade reports in the form of an Excel file. So that's really really interesting what serverless is used for and how to do this grading. So that was really interesting to read, and that's really used in real life. So quite cool scenario. Then also from the world of Azure Functions, two service announcements. Following up last week's end of support for Node 8, I think, and it was a Python version. Now the story continues. Node 10 support will end at the 30th September 2022, as well as the PowerShell 6 support will be ending at the same date. So make sure to do your planning and do your updating to the new versions of that are supported within Azure Functions. Yeah, and with that, let's switch from the serverless world to the container world, and especially to the area of Dapper. There is a really interesting blog post about Dapper bridging the gap between containers and serverless. How a company called Autonavi used Dapper in order to build new serverless solutions on top of Kubernetes. And what's really interesting is what they see as the advantages of using Dapper. Of course, the usage of different languages that you can bring into Dapper because it's more or less language agnostic. And what's also interesting to read is that they choose Dapper. I don't know if I found the section here exactly. Of course not. They choose Dapper because they want to get rid of all the SDK dancing within their code. So they want to leverage the sidecar approach in order to make the life of developers super easy. And that's, I think, one advantage of the sidecar approach, especially if the sidecars are not super huge, which is not that often discussed, in my opinion, but it's really an important thing and is really something that is a high pro of using Dapper. Then Dapper is also asking the community for feedback. They have now a proposal for supporting different resiliency patterns across all the building blocks that Dapper comes with. And that includes timeouts, retries, and circuit breakers. And Dapper has put that into their GitHub repository, and now they would like to get feedback on the proposal. So if you're working with Dapper and if you're interested in the topic, and probably you are, take a look at that one and give your feedback, because that will definitely influence the way Dapper is moving. Now, another news from this week around the area of containers that might have crossed your path. Docker. Docker is updating their product subscriptions and also extending some of them, which makes it necessary for some companies now really to pay for Docker Desktop. So that's important. It's all about Docker Desktop as far as I understood it. And some companies that fall under certain criteria, like more than 250 employees or more than 10 million revenue per year, will now have to get a paid subscription for Docker Desktop. Now, there are some more points to take into account around that announcement, and they are all listed within the Docker FAQ. So first go through or in addition to the blog post, go through the Docker FAQ, as there are some restrictions with respect to the version that is under falling under this new terms. There is a grace period. There are some points that you have to take into account in order to make a clear decision. From my perspective, due to this quite sudden announcement, I think a lot of developers are pushed back from the Docker ecosystem, and I guess there will be quite some move away from the Docker to alternative solutions. I'm quite sure about that one. So I don't know if that was a clever move, to be honest. Now that's all from the container side. Kubernetes side, let's switch to the DevOps side, or this time really purely GitHub side, about announcements. So first of all, GitHub Actions got a little new feature. You can now filter workflow runs based on the creation date. That's available in the UI as well as in the API of GitHub Actions. Then GitHub Actions now support dependency caching for the setup Java GitHub action. So you can now cache your dependencies for Maven and Gradle projects by simply adding the corresponding term within your step definition. And then another new feature around branch protection changes. So as an admin of an GitHub organization or of a GitHub repository, you can now trigger webhooks in order to listen to such changes. So if somebody changes the branch protection rules on their repositories where you were admin or your organization, you're admin of the whole organization, then you can now get an information. There is also a reference within the blog post that I referenced in order to get a more detailed information about what you can do there. And then another improvement that's kind of a bigger one around GitHub. The Git protocol security will be improved on GitHub. And this blog post guides you through on exactly what's changing when this protocol security is improved, why they are changing it, and what are the actions that you have to take in order to comply to this improvement. Then a YouTube short about the topic that I mentioned a few weeks ago about issues and task lists. So you can now break down issues into task lists. And this short video, or YouTube short as it's called now, guides you through how to do that in 43 seconds. So I think really, really helpful, especially if you really run into bigger issues that simply need a little breakdown, and you can reference also other issues then. And it all is really nicely interconnected. Then some news from the area of the broader Microsoft ecosystem or GitHub ecosystem. A blog post by Barbara Forbes about creating websites with Hugo and GitHub Pages. Really nice read. Guides you through the complete setup and creation process of this undertaking. So how to set up Hugo, how to set up GitHub Pages, how to bring things together. Really nice read. I think super helpful. Also in other areas if you deal with GitHub Pages. And then there was an announcement, I think last week already, about TypeScript 4.4. So TypeScript 4.4 is now GA, it's generally available. And I've referenced within the show notes the corresponding announcement that guides you through on the release highlights. So what's new, what's great. For example, like an improved control flow analysis for alias conditions. And quite some other nice things that come with TypeScript 4.4. Then with that, let's switch to the world in between SAP and Microsoft. And I start with something that's not that cool. So over the last few weeks, I have referenced quite some blog posts by Bartosz Jakowski around setting up or bringing together Azure Synapse with your SAP system. This have been 7 extensive and, from a technical perspective, high quality blog posts that have been there in the SAP community. A quality that, from when it comes to technical blog posts, are not that common at the SAP community from my perspective. Now, as of now, if you're clicking on one of those links, they are gone. You get a page not found error. And also, if you take a look at the blog post of Bartosz, they are not available within his timeline. So kind of a strange move from the SAP community. I mean, you could make some guesses why that happened, but letting an author on the community write 7 blog posts over, I don't know, I think at least it was 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and then putting them away, it's not a cool move from my perspective. If the first blog post, it was quite clear, it is about Azure Synapse, so then just do your things as a moderator, but do not wait until a person pushes out that much and spend that much effort in it, from my perspective. So I hope that Bartosz will either somehow align with the SAP community, or he will bring out those great pieces on another blog posting platform like DevTO or something like that. So don't be surprised if you go now to those links that I have referenced. You will get a page not found error. Reasons nobody really knows. Currently, they are gone. So if you started your journey with Synapse, you're currently a bit on your own. That's not that cool. But I think it's worth mentioning because you will not find those pages anymore at the moment. Now, back to something more positive. There is, of course, as every week, a new edition of the SAP on Azure podcast. This one really interesting format with a special guest called Nishan Naiker about his journey as a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, starting from his basis roots with SAP NetWeaver. So that's really nice format from my perspective and touching a lot of topics all around that. So definitely, I think, worth watching. Then there is a new sample within the SAP samples org of the official SAP sample code examples about business technology platform cloud integration and intelligent routing. Basically, it's all about what happens if your cloud integration runs into a failover process or you need to switch due to disaster recovery. How can you do that? Making use of the Azure Traffic Manager. And the repository gives you not only the sample code, but really guides you through extensively through the different steps of the setup and the configuration and how to test everything. So I think it's motivated by a blog post by Martin Pankratz. As far as I have seen from the announcement tweet. So yeah, quite interesting, quite essential, I think, if you set up real life scenarios. Then there is another new also sample with respect to combining stateful RFCs when you work with Azure Logic Apps and the SAP connector. So how can you use that? And there is also a little sample. So if you're digging around in that area, take a look at that one. And then one blog post that's not perfectly correlated to SAP Microsoft, but I think is super helpful if you combine Microsoft 365, especially SharePoint and OneDrive, with SAP. And if you want to test your setup with respect to resiliency, then it's good to know that the Microsoft Graph API for SharePoint and for OneDrive allows you to simulate throttling. So a 429 return code. Because that's built in and you just have to add that as a parameter to the URL when you call the Graph API. So that's available only for SharePoint and OneDrive, but I think that's really cool if you test your final setup, because that's kind of critical stuff. So people get upset when they don't can access the SharePoint. So you have to really have a resilient setup there. Now, that's all from Microsoft and the Microsoft and SAP part. Let's switch to learning things. And there is really one great thing that's coming out from Louise Frese. I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is also a Microsoft MVP. And she's currently learning JavaScript. And she lets us participate in that learning journey by publishing her JavaScript sketch notes on GitHub Pages. So I have referenced within the show notes the announcement tweet as well as the GitHub pages, where you can simply go through. There are already a lot of days in there about objects, array methods, about the basics, really nicely sketched. So it's great handwriting, by the way. Really cool stuff and really nicely brought together all the interesting things. So if you're new to JavaScript, or even if you're not so new to JavaScript, that's definitely something to take a look at. And with that, let's go to the announcements of upcoming conferences. Last week we had SAP and Microsoft. This week, GitHub brought out their date for the GitHub Universe. It will take place on October the 27th and 28th. So again, following different setups like the main broadcast, deep dives, and so on. So if you are working within the GitHub area, I think the last conference was really cool. Save the date. That's definitely something to watch. And before GitHub Universe, there is the first ever Dapper conference on the 19th of October 2021, following approximately 2 years after the announcement of Dapper. So yeah, you can now basically reserve the date, and then what is happening there will be announced a bit later. So quite some stuff this autumn to watch. So DapperCon, GitHub Universe, TechEd, Ignite. So yeah, October, November are fully packed. With that, let's go to the area of developer productivity. First of all, there is an update of the Windows Terminal Preview Edition. That is now updated to the 1.11 release with quite some nice UI updates like the acrylic title bar, quite some nice functional updates around intensifying text and a lot of other features. So if you're using Windows Terminal and want to know what's new, take a look at the blog post that I referenced within my show notes. And then if you're working with the terminal, you might want to set up PowerShell. And Scott Hanselman, who has already pushed out a lot of blog posts how to set that up, now has the ultimate blog post about setting up PowerShell using OMAPosh, Windows Terminal, and a lot of other things in order to make the experience of PowerShell quite unique and quite nice. So if you're setting up this one, or if you have already set up but want to see what has changed, are there any updates, then this blog post is definitely worth reading. And now let's finish up today's session with a little blog post by a senior developer, I would say, and something to wrap your mind around. So it's a very short blog post about topics that this person has changed his mind on after 6 years. After 6 years in the industry. Stuff from let's say development, patterns, architecture, Scrum ceremonies. Really interesting to read. Things that he's changed his mind on. Things that he's picked up along the way. So new opinions that he didn't have there, or old opinions that remain unchanged even after 6 years. So really super short read, super nice read. Something to, yeah, some food for the brain from my perspective. Quite right for this nice sunny weekend. And with that, I'm at the end of today's session. So I hope I had some interesting news for you. And with that, I wish you a nice Saturday, a nice weekend, a successful next week, and see you next Saturday. Until then, bye.